Chavre, hello, a good Erev Shabbos Kodesh. Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Parshas Matos Masei, Chazak, it's Shabbos Chazak, and it's Erev Reish Chodesh Menachem Ov. So there's a lot of things we have to connect together. Before we start, as usual, first we'll give tzedakah. Since the war started, we give tzedakah. G'dei tzedakah shemakareves agula Mashiach now. We're also going to say a posik, a prayer, which is directly related to the theme that we're going to talk about today. And we say this every day before the Yom. Yehi adinoi eliheinu imonu, kasher hoya maviseinu, al yazveinu v'yal yitcheinu. Hashem should be with us as He was with our fathers. May not forsake us nor abandon us. So, the first thing that we have to talk about, obviously, is that it's a Shabbos of the 3 weeks, and where is the message of Golus connected to Parshas Matos and Masei together? So the trigger of today's shir, the springboard, is the Sikh of the Rebbe Chelik Chov Gimel, Matos Masei Menachem Ov. So you have to see the Sikha there for the profundity and depth, which we're not going to be able to repeat. But I'm just going to say the point that the Rebbe speaks there, and then we'll put it together and discuss certain things that we spoke before, etc. The Rebbe says that the words Menachem Ov mean how the Yidden are Menachem, console of the Eibishter. Not like you might think the Menachem Ov is that we are getting consoled from the Father, so that we're in a state that we have pain and we're in exile, and that the Eibishter is with us. But in a certain sense, it's a two-way street. If we say that the Eibishter is with us, that means He's feeling our pain, and He has to be consoled. And this is the unbelievable power of a Yid in this world. Menachem Ov, that a Yid has the power to console our Father Hashem. That's the point of the Sikha, and I don't know how much we're going to cover today. And the Rebbe talks about the difference between the neshamas of a Yid and the body of a Yid, and how each one has a certain quality, etc. See there. But first, let's talk about the connection between Matos and Masei, in reference to the idea of Golus, in reference to the idea that wherever we are, Hashem is. Wherever Hashem is, we are. Yisrael v'kutzbrichu kul echad, we're one. So first of all, we see it right away in the beginning of Parshas Masei. Everyone knows the famous diuk that Chassidus talks about, where it says that Hashem spoke to Moshe, Nekoim nikmas b'nei Yisrael, and He says, take vengeance for the children of Israel. And then when Moshe repeats it, it says, Vaydaber Moshe lo'am leimer, hecholtzum etchem, to give nikmas havaya b'Midyan, that we should take Hashem's vengeance against Midyan. And Rashi over here straight away say on the words nikmas Hashem, first the Eibishter told nikmas Yisrael, then it says nikmas Hashem. Rashi says, sha'oimed keneged Yisrael, whoever stands and fights against the Yidden, ki'ilu oimed keneged HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's as if he's fighting Hashem. In other words, Hashem and the Yidden are one. So that's right away the message in Parshas Matos. At the end of Parshas Masei, and this is really the more what we're going to focus on, is where it says that Hashem tells the Yidden that V'lo tamei es ha'aretz, you should not make impure the land, Asharatem Yeshim Va, in which you shall dwell, Asharani Sheichem B'Soicha, in whose midst I rest, Ki ani Hashem Shoichein B'Soich B'nei Yisrael, because I Hashem rest among the Yidden. So the point is that Hashem says He rests with the Yidden. Similar to what we said over there, Hashem and the Yidden are one, and the Yidden and Hashem are one. So to over here it says that don't become impure. First Rashi says that you should not become impure and make me rest in your impurity. That's what the first Rashi says, Hashani Sheikhem B'Seicha. And then he says, Av Bizman Shehem Tmeim Shechina B'Neim. Even when the Yidden are impure, Hashem is with them. So, this is a very, very big chiddush. This point over here especially. Which means, you could think, I want to go to another subject, which I if I remember correctly, this was a discussion about Hashem being together with the Yidden. But before that, let me introduce a word called empathy. We spoke about this, Pasha Shmois 5784, I think. In general, I want to tell you, I believe there are three words that are very, very important in Yiddishkeit, and they all start with E. There's enlightenment, which means clarity, Klorkeit, which means you have the right perspectives. It starts in the mind. Then there's empathy. That's talking about how you relate, to what degree you relate, how much you have to demand yourself, what's the right barometer, to what degree. That's covered in empathy, character traits, emotions, you could say. And then there's E, which means empowerment, which enables you to carry through whatever it is. It could be at the higher level or lower level. So today we're going to talk about empathy. Now, first let's go back to the story in Shmois, which we spoke about a long time ago, which in the first encounter that Moshe Rabbeinu has with Hashem, what does Hashem show him? In the first revelation, the burning bush. What does Rashi say in the story of the burning bush? Imoi anoichi b'tzara. The first message Moshe is meant to give to the Yidden, and the first message that Moshe is meant to know as a leader, empathy. I didn't say this last time, but Ulay Shleimar, that there's a profound lesson in this, and this addresses the famous question about why do bad things happen to good people? It's from the oldest questions. It goes back thousands of years. Avram Avinu in the story of Stoim, Moshe Rabbeinu a couple of times, Lo Marei Lo Mazeh, and when he was defending different stories that happened with the Yidden, where they did wrong. So the truth is, what's the response? Guess what? On a certain level, of course, we want an answer, but why do we want an answer? We want an answer because sometimes you need an approach. I know for myself that sometimes you're going through something and you need to have a certain attitude, a certain approach, a certain perspective. And you struggle to find some sort of perspective that enables you to be like a compass or a guiding light to be able to go through the minefield, etc. That's one aspect, true. And we'll call that an answer. But you know what? The first message that Moshe Rabbeinu gives leaders is that not always you have to give an answer. Sometimes to show how you feel, that person's situation, that person's condition, is more important. Ulay Shleima. And that's why right now, the first port of call, the first order of the day, what was the first message that Hashem gives Moshe? Imay anoichi b'tzara. You're a teacher, you're a father, you're a leader. Someone comes over to you and pours out his heart. Give him a hug. Cry with him. As Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, the first message, what I have to say, who am I? Imay anoichi b'tzara. I am with you. Now, we could get into a discussion now about what's the difference between sympathy and empathy. In the words of Kabbalah and Chassidus, I believe sympathy is Sfiras HaYesoid and empathy is Malchus. Empathy means Shetach HaMakabel. It's not that you reach out to someone else and therefore you try to think and understand and appreciate what that person's going through. No. Empathy is much deeper than sympathy. Empathy means you actually become that person, not as if you were in his shoes, but you are in his shoes. It's a high level. Like we spoke in the Rashi and Shmois about Moshe Rabbeinu Nosan Liba Ve'enev. He had to do something, he had to think that way, he had to do an action to be able to put himself into such a situation that doesn't usually come naturally. Take a pause, see the other person for the first time in your life properly, listen to another person properly, until it hits the spot that you will experience empathy and to say, Ima Anochi B'tzara. That means empathy. And that's the most important thing. So now, first of all, we understand what empathy is. Now I want to say another point, which I hope I'm right. I hope I'm right. Vashem Yechaper Badi, if I make a mistake. It's a theory. Now, on the one hand, I know that I might be very wrong, because if I was right, how come the Rabbeim, we never heard this from the Rabbeim? On the other hand, I believe that on a certain level, it's correct because it fits with everything else. There's a very, very deep theological discussion about whether there's something called tzimtzum kipshutoi or tzimtzum nish kipshutoi, which means that in the Kabbalah of the Arizal, it speaks about the famous tzimtzum, the contraction, the concealment. Now, there were certain people that believed that it meant tzimtzum kipshutei. However, we're going to understand pshat. Speak to your local mystic, speak to your local professor of theology, speak to your local scholar of the dispute between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. But there were people that held that tzimtzum kipshutei, there was a certain level of separation, chas v'sholem, avoid, chas v'sholem, we have to understand what that means, where it means literally that there's a change between before creation and after creation, that there's a tzimtzum kipshutei, literally a diminishing of Hashem's presence. And they had the argument, is it the way of the melech to be b'makom hashpa? Is it the way of the king to be in the place of garbage? And Chassidus, this I heard from the Rebbe more than once, in the later years, where the Rebbe went into the discussion and says, you know what? Logically speaking, you could even say that it makes more sense to say tzimtzum kipshutei. To say that the Eibishter himself should be in such a world of impurity and sin, and we don't see always how things are going in the right way. And it's lav urchad malka, it's not the way of the king to be dwelling in garbage, in dirt. But no, even though logically you might be able to say that it makes more sense to say tzimtzum kipshutei literally, but the Baal Shem Tov, and that's why it's called Kabbalah, this is the way we received it, this was the Messiah, the Baal Shem Tov was Makabel from Achiash Shaleni, and so too, he gave it over to the Maggid and Alter Rebbe, etc., that we believe tzimtzum is nish kipshutei. It doesn't mean literally that he departed. So what I feel is that it's not a question of the logic. It's not a question of reasoning. It's not a question of theology in a philosophical level. It's about the relationship. Since Yisrael v'kutzivrichu kul echad, since the Eibishter and the Yidden are completely one, wherever Hashem goes, we go. Wherever we go, Hashem goes. Shtei chatzoi tzuris, we're like Kaviyachol, two halves. So therefore, there's no way that we could believe, we could go with the idea of tzimtzum kipshutoi. Because tzimtzum kipshutoi would mean that there's a Yid living in tachtoinem, and Hashem made a certain tzimtzum, and that tzimtzum represents a certain level, a certain degree, in the most subtle form of separation. And that cannot be. L'fishitis Abba Shem Tov and Teres Achsidis, where the whole word is that a Yid is connected to the Eibishter, not stam to the Eibishter, as the Eibishter lowers himself and gets involved in creation, but as the Eibishter is, B'chol Atzmusoi, and at the same time, he feels your pain. However, we're going to understand it. We can't understand what it means that the Eibishter is crying with us in Golus. As the Rebbe brings in that sikh over there, B'chol tzarosam lo yitzar. any level of pain that you're feeling. You got cut by the scalpel of the surgeon. You fell on the floor, you banged your hand. Whatever pain you're feeling, the Eibishter feels that pain. And maybe even more so. How can you say that? Some people say, there's an expression, I don't know where it comes from. I hope it's not terrible. They have no mercy on Hashem. But it's not true. And that's the point of the Sikha, that every single Yid does feel Hashem's pain on a certain level. And that is the beauty of Yiddishkeit. The beauty of Yiddishkeit is that the deepest philosophical level, where you think that the Eibishter is beyond feelings and beyond emotions, Moshe Rabbeinu was told from the beginning that the relationship with the Eibishter and Yidden is, I am there with you and I feel the pain. And this is the point throughout the history of the Jewish people in Golus. And this is the message for the 3 weeks, that Menachem of Hashem needs to be consoled, because Hashem is with us and feels the pain. There's another whole meaning of Golul Edim Shchini Moim, see chapter 17 of Tanya. That's a different point. We'll leave that for another time, because that's another whole discussion. Maybe how even when we speak about how bad Chas v'Sholom a Yid could end up causing damage, but in that itself we see the power of the Yid, that only a Yid could cause such damage. And again, because the relationship, something like they say in English, the people that are the closest to you hurt you the most. For that reason, because they're the closest to you and the dearest to you, therefore they could end up hurting you the most. And it's the same thing with the Eibishter and the Yidden. It's because the Yidden are mushish and atzmos mamish. So therefore every single thing that a Yid does makes a world of a difference, including Golul Edem, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 17, when someone does something which is an act which is inappropriate for a Jew, he drags Hashem with him down. And that's what Rashi says over here in the first part of the Rashi in Masei over there. Don't do something impure, which causes that the Eibishter will also dwell in that impurity. Imagine, we're saying that when a Yid does something not improper, Schlepter Arab the Meibishten Kaviyachol, he drags down the Eibishter with him, and that's the word Hasheichen Itom Betoich to Moisam. So getting back to this discussion about whether Tzimtzum Kipshute or not Kipshute, if I remember correctly, I once heard a discussion about it, that from this verse, where it says Hasheichen Itom Betoich to Moisam, that Hashem resides even in their impurity, we see clearly a Klora Pasik that tells us that Hashem does reside in their impurity. B'makim ha'ashpa. So we see clearly that it's not Tzimtzum Kipshutei, that Hashem departed, but that Hashem is totally with us in the lowest situation that we're in. And for some reason, when we talk about life, as we know from ourselves, sometimes you have a burden, you have a pain, and you go to your parent and you discuss it with your parent. The point is not always that your parent has an answer, or that the parent could always necessarily help you, but it's that someone shares the pain with you. And that makes a big difference. And the same thing is over here true with the Eibishter. The fact that we know that Golul Edim Shchini Moem, for a serious-minded individual, where it's not always about whether things work out, or not, but it's where I am in a relationship, in relation to Hashem. Am I close or not? And I know that He's so close. He's with me all the way. That's the thing which touches me the deepest. There's a word that I heard in the name of the Baditchev, and I chaz it many times, that the Baditchev said, you could be with God or against God, but never without Him. And that's the message of the 3 weeks. We're in this together, and we'll get out of it together. The Eibishter will take us out of Golus when we cry out, during the 3 weeks especially, that we can't take it anymore. Ad Masei. And that's why, together with this, there's a couple of famous sayings. First of all, I cannot quote you the exact date, when we talk about the issue of suffering, the Rebbe said that the Frierdiker Rebbe, behind closed doors, said a certain expression. We don't always have to justify God. That's what he said. So it's a pretty counterintuitive statement for a tzaddik, because a tzaddik might want to just say, Tzidkoscho tzedek li'elam, Hashem, you're always right. But no, that's not what the Frierdiker Rebbe said. Man darf nicht allemal matzlig sein dem Eibishten. When something happens, something terrible, in general, sometimes on a personal level, sometimes on a communal level, stop saying it was because we talked Lashon Hara, or because we didn't dress sneezdik, or because we didn't learn enough Torah. Could be those things are all true. And it could be this is something called V'achayit Naliba, each one on a personal level should try to fix up wherever it needs fixing up. And if your job is as a rabbi and you feel there's something which is really bad, fine. But in general, that's not what the approach should be. The approach is that the Eibusha does certain things and certain things are gzeiros, and we can't always justify it, especially something that happens on a large scale, like the Holocaust. And I think the Frierdiker Rebbe was talking about the Holocaust, and he said, "Medaf nishal mo matzlik zayin dem Eibishten." And if I remember correctly, the way it goes further is, "Al alein." In other words, we don't have to always justify Hashem. Hashem himself will justify it one day when Mashiach comes. And if I remember correctly, when I once heard the Rebbe speaking about it, he said that the Frierdiker Rebbe said it behind closed doors, which means he didn't want it to be publicized because it could be seen a bit in a controversial manner. But nevertheless, he said it behind closed doors, and he knew that it's going to become publicized. And I think the Rebbe meant that the Frierdiker Rebbe once told that to the Rebbe himself. So this is today's discussion about suffering, pain, exile. We don't have to justify God. He will do that. What we have to do is to let that person know, I hear you, I feel for you. Is there anything I could do for you? How could you alleviate the other person's pain? That's what's important. Practice some empathy. There's another saying which everyone has to tell themselves is also a humorous statement that it's recorded in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Sichos that sometimes he'd have a discussion with his father, and his father would say, "Wenn du wirst älter werden, wirst du verstehen." When you get older, you'll understand. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "Ich bin älter geworden." A minute later, he said, "But I got older already. I got older and wiser." And then the Rebbe Rashab answered, "Aber am wird älter zu schnell, it is nicht gesund." If you age prematurely, then it's unhealthy. When we say du wirst älter werden, when you get older, you'll understand, it means, it takes time. Maybe next year, 2 years, 5 years, etc. Just a minute later, it doesn't mean you became older to be able to understand the secret of existence and whatever's going on. So, I'll just finish with the story. There's a Yid in Sydney, his name is Meir Mas, and his father was Sam Mas. And Meir Mas went to Yeshiva Gedola sometime in the early 70s. And he came from a house which was totally secular. His father was a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz who came from Minkach. And his father had not gone to a shul from 1944 to 1956. And he never spoke about his experiences. Meanwhile, his son they learned in Yeshiva Gedola in Melbourne, started putting on tzitzis and wearing a yarmulke and becoming a Chassidish bacher from Temchit Mimim. The father tried to discourage him, but it wasn't working, and the son found this spirituality in his life. Anyways, the father was going to New York, and he decided he's going to go into the Rebbe. He thought, I'll give the Rebbe a donation, and we'll fix up things and get my son set straight. Anyways, he walked into Yechidus, and the Rebbe tells him, sit down. And Sam Moss tells the Rebbe, but in Minkach, I was taught that we don't sit in front of the Rebbe. The Rebbe stood up and walked around the table and stood next to him side by side. And then he started asking him about his experiences, his life experiences. And he started telling him about Auschwitz. And the Rebbe was very interested in the Munkacher. The Rebbe liked the Munkacher. And he was asking questions about how life was in Munkach. He was talking, Mr. Mas, and he never spoke about these experiences in the Holocaust before to his children. And he started crying. And the Rebbe put his arm around him. And then he shook his hand and he told him, don't worry about anything, everything will be fine. When he came out of the Yechidus with the Rebbe, they didn't discuss, by the way, what he had in mind, that he was going to discuss his son, Meir, and what's going on with him. Nothing, it didn't come up. When he came out of Yechidus, he said that he felt the weight of the Holocaust was taken off his shoulders. That means he had inside deep levels of grievances and whatever you want to call it. And the Rebbe, by showing getting up and walking around the table and putting his arm around him and then shaking hands, helped him and lifted him up. And this Mr. Mas said later that Menachem Begin had told him that he feels that the Rebbe is the greatest leader because he lifted up the Yidden after the Holocaust. He restored their pride. He restored the feelings of confidence and the feelings of being a Yid. So what we see from this story, and this is the message that we have to take both from Matos, that the Eibishter says Nikmas Havaya, Moshe says Nikmas Havaya, and the Eibush says Nikmas Yisrael, because the Yisrael and Kodshebrichu Kulachad. And the same thing we see with Hasheich and Itam B'Teichtum Oisom. When we say that the Eibush is with us, that is the thing which gives us the greatest feeling of Nechama. How it's going to work out in Yetz Hashem, we'll find out. And we ask now, we're not being matzdik anything, we want Teiva Nirva Nigla. The Rebbe says in the Sikha also, that when the Gemara says, Kishem Shem Evorchim, Ala Toiv, Kach Mevorchim, even in something which doesn't seem good, the Rebbe writes, Pshat, when the Gemara says Kishem, sometimes it means Kishem the same way, and sometimes we say Kishem, it's only similar, but not the same thing. On this, the Rebbe says it's only Kishem, because when it comes to Teiva Nirva Nigla revealed, we say Baruch HaTeiva Meitiv. We say one blessing. Thank you, Hashem, for revealed goodness. When it comes to something else, we say Baruch Dayan Hamas. So the fact that we don't say exactly the same blessing is because we're not holding on a level that we can make the same exact blessing. Because we're mortals, we're limited, we can't really feel the joy going through hardships and suffering in the same way like we feel the joy when we have revealed goodness and kindness. The Eibusha should help. The taka take from Yad Mamish. Before Shabbos Kodesh, we should have the Gula Mitis Vashlema, and we should all be able to say Baruch HaTeiva Meitiv, B'Teiva Nirva Nigla, and it should only be revealed goodness and kindness for every single one of us. But first, we have to do what we have to do. Practice more empathy with our zulas, with our neighbor, with our friends. And if we do that and do what the Eibishter wants, as he himself taught us, so then it will be kimayim upon him, and the Eibishter will show us the ultimate chesed by bringing the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take of Me'ad Mamish. Od yoter tov, od yoter tov, b'teiva nirva nigla. Good Shabbos posting from my home. Be'ez Hashem Yisborech, your man in Melbourne.